Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Trig Podcast of Joy and Gozo TV on this beautiful Saturday, almost 2 p.m., 1:15 p.m. here on this afternoon. It's been quite the year, week, life. What can we say these days, right? But I wanted to talk about love. And, I've been thinking a lot about where to put our focus in these days, where there are at least two major things happening, and we all know what they are. So we'll just maybe put a pause on the ongoing and necessary conversation, both around race and, of course, the virus. But, this morning, as we try to do every day, at least on Saturdays, if not during the week, in the afternoons, etc. Anyway, Rochelle and I, my wife, we had what we call coffee time, where we drink our yummy coffee. Let's see what today's coffee is like. Very tasty, nice and hot. And we pray, we talk about just all that we're feeling, all that we're going through, as first as a couple, second as parents, and then third as leaders, both of our the people that we serve, the people that we love. And so she was leaving right now to go do some things. And then we were just talking on the way out, and she said, don't forget to let your gifts come out. And she then said, love people. And it got me thinking about how right now everyone is confused on what to focus on. Everyone is maybe not confused, and they are focusing on a certain thing. And I think that when it comes to injustice and racial issues, we have to focus on that right now, regardless of what color or who you are and all that stuff. But I thought, what is behind all of that? Or what is inside of the things that we focus on? And I always think about love and loving people. When Rochelle on her way out said, don't forget to focus on loving people, it just kind of struck me as truth. And that's, I guess, the message I want to bring to you. Don't forget to focus on loving people. And that love can look like many things. Protesting, it could mean like prayer. It could mean you doing your work faithfully. It could mean you giving to your church. It could mean voting in November. I mean, there's a lot of ways that love looks like. Love isn't just mental assent. We know in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is patient, love is kind. And so obviously we have a mandate to do and to act based on love. Like James says, faith without works is dead. Love without faith or without actions is dead. And so, but I guess it just really rung true for me, what Rochelle said, to focus on loving people. So yesterday, I did that. And this week, I've tried to be more, quote, hands-on with love. And so there are a few things that I did and have been doing that really touched my heart, but I still feel challenged in that. To not just simply know information or feel certain things or to have opinions, but to actually go to what we do best as people, especially as people of God, and that is to love one another. I remember a few months ago, I was driving to church and my car stopped. It was raining and my car has I think it had been dealing with a loose cable on the battery. And so I was out there. I think I was wearing a suit because maybe I was going to, I don't know, some sort of special event. And it was raining, and so I took off my coat, and I was under the hood there. And I know enough about cars to get in trouble, but I'm definitely not an expert. But I knew that this cable, was bad. It wasn't the battery, it was this cable. The cable that goes to the battery was just shot. But, I couldn't get anywhere. So I called my friend, and he came out, and he fixed it for me. He picked me up. We went to the store, to AutoZone or whatever, and he fixed it for me. And I always think about that. Love is action. Love is having someone call you that has a problem and you go out of your way to go help that person. And that's just one way, of course, but that maybe for those of us that are action repressed, that is definitely a challenge always. Now, you might be very good at doing, but maybe you don't let your heart really be known to anyone. Maybe you have a hard time using your words, as they say, to say I love you to somebody or to give someone a hug. Remember that not everyone receives love through doing things for them. Some people need, and now we're getting into the 5 languages of love, they need words of affirmation. So let me just describe these just in case these might be helpful to somebody. So the ways in which we can describe love, or the 5 languages of love by I think his name is Gary Chapman, a book written in the 80s. First is acts of service. So when my friend came and fixed my car, that's what we would call acts of service. And so as you listen to these, try to identify with one. I know that you need all 5, but try to identify when someone has done one of these things, if it meant the world to you more than the others, okay? So number 1, as I said, is when someone did something for you. Number 2 is when someone gave you words of affirmation. So someone said, great job. Wow, congratulations on graduation. And so see if that's your love language, right? Number 3 is time spent. And so can you think of a time when someone spent time with you? Maybe just sitting next to you, maybe listening to you, maybe going out to get some food, hanging out, as we used to call it, or I guess still call it, and it meant the world to you. You're like, man, that really means everything. I love everything, but that means the world to me. So maybe that is your love language. Time spent. Number 4 is touch, physical touch. Now, again, you might be like, we can't even do that these days, right? But it doesn't change who you are. Can you think of a time when someone embraced you, someone held your hand, obviously someone that you know, someone that you love, and it just meant the world to you? Literally, your biology, your body, your mind and soul just relaxed, and you felt so loved. Perhaps touch is your love language. And then the 5th one is gifts. So can you think of a time when someone gave you something and it was maybe something very simple? It wasn't even expensive, but maybe they drew that card themselves and made the card themselves. Or perhaps maybe it was an expensive gift and it just meant the world to you. You thought, wow, man, that really, out of all the things that my husband or my friend or my kids do for me, that really meant the most. So maybe that. So the reason why all these things are important is because these days, when we can focus on so many things, remember, as my wife said, focus on loving people. Focus on loving people the way they like to be loved. Now, obviously, we all have a certain strength, right? Maybe you are a doer. And so the way that you express love is by doing. A lot of fathers are that way, right? Traditionally. Maybe you are someone who likes to cook for your kids. So perhaps that is, I don't know, maybe that is gifts. You like to use, maybe it is time spent. Maybe as you make that meal, what you love most about that is that they are with you, that your children are there at the house, at the table. So think about what you love to do. And then here's a sacrifice. Try to do things that are not normal or easy for you. So for me, I have a friend who, I remember when we were younger, he would call me to help him move. And I'm like, oh, can I sing to you instead? Can I read you the Bible instead? Can we talk? Can I give you a hug? But now when I needed help moving, he was the first one there because obviously that's what it was easy for him to do things, acts of service. So, but true, I think discipline and sacrifice is when you do things that are not natural to you. And that's always a challenge, but focus on what you do love to do and do it. So for me, I love to talk. I love to sing. I love to call people. So this week I have been doing those things, just encouraging, loving, providing peace, guidance. and using, quote, my, I guess, gifts, or just simply kind of, I guess, my personality to love people. And so I hope that people feel loved, those that I have reached out to. But I guess my whole point in this is the importance of being in our love versus in our hate. You know, yesterday I was watching a lot of videos just from the 60s and 70s with all this racial unrest. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. being maybe the best example, but there's a lot of other examples. I don't want to go into all the names, but that there's no doubt they elude, or not elude, they emute, they give off this more violent feeling. And maybe that's not even fair for me to say. What's the word now? Not elude, emute, give off. I don't know. There's a nicer word than give off. Maybe violence isn't the right word, but maybe it's just simply bolder, aggressive. Maybe these are better words. I've watched a lot of those videos, and a lot of it is very true when it comes to race and the frustrations of the day that are not new to our country, or to really to the human race. But I think a lot of certainly for us as people of faith, we are called to be people of love. But love that isn't lean towards me, that isn't abusing you, or that maybe another way to put it is love that is very aware, self-aware of perhaps the problems that I may have. If let's say I have $100, and let's just say I stole that money, right? And I give you $10 because let's say you are my handyman, or maybe you clean my house. These numbers obviously are way off, but just for the sake of argument. Now, if I give you $10 and you've been making $5 at the other house, then you, as the person cleaning my house, you may think, oh, this man's so generous. Well, but am I? Am I loving you in a just way? First, I stole that money. And second, I normally pay $10 and I'm only paying you $5 because I want to keep the other $5 for myself, even though I stole that money. Now, let's just say you worked hard for that money. The same principle applies, right? Am I being fair in my love for you? So this is where, as you can see, love is more than just simply doing nice things. There's that element, as we know in Micah 6:8, called justice. Maybe a better word would be to love justly. And isn't that what the Bible says? That we ought to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly. Very powerful kind of, I guess, triad there, right? Act justly. Back to my example, if I stole that money and then give the cleaning lady $5 when I normally pay $10, maybe because she doesn't speak English, or because I see that she's young, or because I see that she's desperate, or whatever, that's not acting justly, even though I may think I'm such a loving man. So this is where I think for us in the Christian faith, we have to really examine our hearts when we are loving other people. Are we loving justly? And then, are we loving humbly? And that's another struggle that I think we can have is our love to really just to make us feel good? Are we serving others out of our own pride? Kind of, as they call it, humble brag, right? And maybe we, as people of faith, we hide these things very well from others. We're like, oh, of course I'm doing it for godly reasons. But maybe it's better to say, you know what? Yeah, sometimes I feel proud of how kind I am, or I feel very angry or upset when people don't love me back. And so all these things are a part of the inward journey, as I like to call it, of learning to love in a more holistic, in a more godly way. Because if you think of how Jesus loved, wow, I mean, talk about loving. I mean, ultimately, his love had nothing to do with fairness, right? It was an unfair, you could call it, an extreme love. What do I mean? Well, he gave his life for his very accusers. I mean, so now back to my example, let's say I stole $100. My cleaning lady, I normally pay the others 10, but because this one doesn't speak English, I pay her 5. Even though she may be happy, I know that I'm stealing. But imagine if I was to look at Jesus in his example. Love means that I give her the $100, meaning that I sacrifice everything for her. And that maybe I even go into my savings where I have maybe another $1,000, and I make reparations, as they call them, for her and her family that I've been stealing from for the last, let's say, 6 months that I've hired her. My point is that if you really want to think about Jesus's way of loving, let's just stick with human love, right? I mean, the way Jesus loved was radical. He gave his life for his enemies, his friends, for Judas and Peter, for the thieves on the cross, for the Roman guards that were in bondaging, that were enslaving him, that were enslaving the Jewish nation. I mean, it is political. It is filled with race. It is filled with injustice. Jesus' life was filled with all the very things that we're dealing with today, and yet his example was to give his life. Now, that wasn't the only thing he did to show love. He healed people. He threw tables. He challenged the Pharisees. He challenged his own disciples. He walked on water. He performed miracles. He mostly performed miracles and healed the sick. Those were his 2 major signs before his death and resurrection. But then at the end, the ultimate example of love for him was to give his life. So what does that mean for you and for me, to give our lives for other people, for people that you don't like, for people that don't agree with you, for people, to make it more relevant, people of other races, colors, or maybe of other political bents, maybe people of different ages, and I think that is what we are called to do, is to love, but to love with eyes wide open. It's like marriage, right? I can't love my wife and criticize that I don't like the way she dresses, or I don't like that she works there. I'm not sure why she's helping her mom, or why are you not making me this meal? I mean, what kind of love would that be if I'm constantly criticizing and cutting her down? And I mean, so obviously love has, back to Micah 6:8, a level of justice, a level of humility, a level of action and kindness. So, and that's what Jesus did. He gave his life for his friends, right? John 17 talks about that. I want to actually speak on that tomorrow, so I encourage you to come back tomorrow for my talk, my meditations on what love really is. What does love look like? And the fact that we're called to love, but I would say in a very different way than we have been loving. Or maybe for some, we need to actually go back to the way we used to love before we had all of these different tensions. And now we're called to love, maybe, I guess what I'm trying to say, even though we're being more challenged to love, and it's maybe more difficult to love, really our marching orders have not changed. We need to love others. We need to love sacrificially. We need to love joyfully. We need to love patiently and kindly. We need to love the orphan, the widow, the immigrant, the stranger, the senior, the person in need. We need to cry with those who are crying. We need to rejoice. And then, if you really want to be holistic here about love, we need to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul. I mean, that's really the greatest commandment, as we know. As Jesus said, if you want to boil down all 600 plus commandments, I mean, it was 10, but then, the Pharisees added hundreds more. He said, if you want to boil down the whole law to 2 things, or 1 thing, is love. Love God and love others. And then, of course, he talked about the Samaritan woman. He talked about the Good Samaritan. So back to race. I mean, watching some of these videos, there's this huge thing about blacks and Jews and anti-Semitism, and I mean, a lot of just opinions, and you could call it rage. I mean, you want to talk about race issues. I mean, Jesus loved this Samaritan woman. That's Daisy, my dog. She's out there barking at the squirrels. Why would the writers of the Bible all gospel writers include the fact that this one was a Samaritan. Why didn't they just say this woman who was an adulteress? Excuse my dog, she's out there. I may have to go and give her a little treat. My point is, it's in there because that was the reality of the day. The Samaritan woman said, why are you talking to me? First, I'm a woman. Second, I'm not exactly a very pure woman. And third, I'm a Samaritan and you Jews hate us. So, I mean, you have this. And then the disciples came and they criticized Jesus, said, why are you talking to this non-Jewish person? So, and yet Jesus wasn't like, well, let's just pray. Let's go to church, just read our Bibles. Let's not talk about that. No, Jesus went right to it. And he dealt with those issues. And so my point back to love is that to love God means that we love justly, that we face these issues. I was thinking about this the other day. I was telling a friend, the irony is that some people say, let's not talk about race or politics or social issues in church. And yet the minute that the pastor says, in the name of the Father, God, Holy Ghost, see you next week, the very moment people are in the parking lot talking about race, money, economics, the government, and in the car, they're already arguing, probably with whatever the pastor said or didn't say, about politics, money, sex, and these, remember that sexuality issues. Meaning the minute that we step out of church, we're talking about these things. It's almost like we want our church experience to be almost like this place that is not really connecting with our day-to-day life. And maybe I think some of that is important because we want our spiritual experience to move us beyond our earthly problems, right? That's why we go to church. Those that go to church is because we are tired of talking about hate and violence. And so we go to church wanting to not escape those things, but to have a different perspective, a higher perspective. But I guess what I would say is that what we see in Jesus constantly is that on his way to a higher level of thinking, of love, he started with this woman's reality, with her reality as a non-Jew, as a fornicator woman, as a poor woman, blah, blah, blah. And from there, he brought her up, back to the story of the Good Samaritan. He started with this man who was beaten by robbers. So, I mean, you have all this justice and reality of life involved in religion, connected to faith. I think sometimes, mostly maybe in some churches, we are desperate to disconnect those things out of fear, out of maybe guilt, out of not wanting to deal with those things, maybe out of wanting to escape those tough issues. But in other parts of the Christian faith, people are very used to and accustomed to talking about both, as D.L. Moody would say, reading the LA Times and the Bible at the same time together. And the fact is that now, how can you not do that, right? How can you not have your phone and your Bible app in your same phone, right? We are more than ever here in 2020 facing these issues head on. You can't hide from this stuff that's happening, maybe with Rodney King or maybe with the Watts riots, because people were still at work or there was no social media or no one was really, affected by this. You could hide or you could live your life. Now with this quarantining that's happening, this quarantine, meaning where we have 90% of our eyes focused on our phones, and the fact that this man did what he did in Minneapolis. I mean, it's impossible to ignore it. And I believe that the Christian faith, we as people of God have to then say, well, what can we do? How can we love? How can we love? And so I can't wait to talk about love. Tomorrow we're going to talk about that passage. Greater love has no man more than this, and to give his life for his friends. And then we're going to talk about the Good Samaritan. We're going to talk about the Samaritan woman. And we're going to dive into this issue of, as Francis Chan would call it, crazy love. But going through the Samaritan streets, going through this alley where this man was beaten by these robbers. We have to go through this in order to understand love, in order to be challenged to love, in order to end up at a place of genuine and more authentic love. So make sure that you share this broadcast. Make sure that you hello my brother Reynal. Pastor, thank you for being here. I'm just wrapping up here, but thank you for being here, my brother, my Pastor Reynal. I was just wrapping it up here, but thank you for being here. Reynal, excuse me, I keep saying Reynal. I bet that happens to you a lot, but thank you for being here, my dear pastor. And so, yeah, I'm wrapping up. Thank you for being here, everyone. Make sure that you share this broadcast with your friends. Make sure that you let people know, tag them below. And yeah, you can just go back to the beginning of this broadcast. As you know, this is, as I always say, YouTube is my favorite platform because all the videos are there on a playlist, so you can easily go back. But wherever, on Facebook, wherever, you can obviously watch this from the beginning and go from there. Thank you for being here, and I will see you.